All right. All right, looks like we're good to go on YouTube. What's up, guys? Welcome in. And Facebook, of course. Facebook's being Facebook. Give it a few minutes. All right, Bueller. Why is this being so difficult? Hey, Jermaine Dunbar. Hey, YouTube family. We're just waiting to try to get Facebook up and rolling here. Not some great news on the recruiting trail today. One of Georgia's top linebacker prospects in the 2020 class. Obviously, this has changed a little bit recently here. It looks like Facebook is finally working. Huzzah. Barrett Carter, one of the best linebacker prospects in the country. For my money, one of the best high school prospects, regardless of ranking, in the state of Georgia for the 2021 recruiting cycle. He announced his college decision today. Actually, pretty recently, we just had a story go up on Dog Nation about it and what it means, what comes next. And Clemson went in and landed another really talented player. Carter, I think, is definitely someone who would have filled a certain need for Georgia in this 2021 recruiting class at linebacker. Linebacker is in my opinion, the biggest need for Georgia in this cycle, both at inside linebacker and at outside linebacker. Georgia's going to lose at least four linebacker prospects in this class after the 2020 season. Monty Rice, Nate McBride, Walter Grant, and Jermaine Johnson at least, and that's if guys like Quay Walker, Aziz Ojolari, and Adam Anderson all don't go pro. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Thank you, Joseph Kennedy. Welcome in. Matt Talley, good to see you. Hopefully now you guys are at least able to hear me a little bit better. If you could let me know on Facebook, that'd be great. I had my headphones plugged in like an idiot. Just to get it out of the way, Carter, I think he's going to be a very good collegiate linebacker, moves very well, very good player. Travis McCullough, good to see you. And Clemson, and I'll have something later in the week sort of on recruiting the metro Atlanta area and Georgia's success rate there. Clemson in recent years obviously has had a ton of success in that part of the state, in that part of the country. And, oh boy, why is this? Hold on. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh my God. All right, and since it looks like Facebook is struggling, we're just going to plow along on YouTube. Hopefully Facebook figures itself out. And I'll keep talking, and hopefully the thing works. And if it doesn't, I can always just repost it later. So Barrett Carter now going to Clemson. Larry Goldberg, good to see you. I do know that I'm on Matt Talley. It's just, I'm talking to YouTube as well. This is not good. Let me end live video. YouTube, you're just getting all the technology stuff that I'm real sorry, YouTube guys. I'm going to try and hopefully get this up and running in between. But yeah, so Barrett Carter, he's going to Clemson. I think this is a pretty big loss, or not a loss, but a miss for Georgia, just given just given the fact that linebacker is such a need, Kirby Smart spoke about this back on National Signing Day, talking about the 2020 recruiting class, and he was looking forward and discussing needs for 2021, and linebacker was a position he mentioned outright. And you have that, and Barrett Carter is someone who is close to Georgia geographically. Of the elite linebacker prospects in this 2021 class, Carter was the closest to Georgia. He plays at North Gwinnett. North Gwinnett is one of the best high schools in the state of Georgia and thus in the entire country. And to not land a prospect like Barrett Carter, I do think is a miss in this class. I think he's someone who could have helped out both right away and long-term, just given the depth that what he could provide in that room. Similar sort of measurable speed stuff to Roquan Smith. Obviously, expecting him to be that, I don't think it's fair. But at the same point in time, he is someone who, potentially could be that type of player. And I think the fact that Clemson was in on him and Clemson ends up getting him shows a lot about the type of player that he is and potentially is going to be. So now to spin it to the positive side, where does Georgia go next at the linebacker spot? I think, they have one linebacker committed in Elijah Judy. He is an outside linebacker. He's from Philadelphia. That is sort of what I expect him to be at Georgia. He's out of Philadelphia. So Georgia already has one spot. They're probably going to take between 4 or 5, sort of depending on how the rest of the recruiting class shakes out and where they go from there. Wow, it says that I'm still live on Facebook, even though I am not. Man, this looks real bad. So they have one linebacker. I think the biggest target right now for Georgia, regardless of position in this 2020 class, now becomes Shmuel Munden. Shmuel Munden is a 5-star. He's listed as an outside linebacker, but like Carter, he projects to be an inside linebacker at the next level. He is from Paulding County High School in Dallas, Georgia, so another in-state prospect for Georgia. Munden has made a little bit of news recently, sort of hinting at a possible June decision. Jeff Sintel wrote a very good story on him, I believe, last week, sort of outlining where Munden sort of is in the recruiting process and what he is looking for and what he's looking at. Georgia's obviously very well positioned here, as they were for a good time with Carter. And the next step forward is he's teased a potential commitment in June. As I wrote in the story, there is no more important, I think, commitment or prospect right now than Shmuel Munden for Georgia in this 2021 recording board. Hey, William, yes, I'm aware of the Facebook issues. I believe, hopefully, that I have solved those, and I'm very quickly fixing those. Current coverage. Talking. What's next? Recruiting. This is just the worst. I'm so sorry, guys. Campus. May 19th episode. All right, hope this works. 3, 2, 1. And hopefully we are back up on Facebook now. I should have headphones, but I don't because I'm a dope. So anyway, Shmuel Munden is the big name to know. All right, it looks like we're back up on Facebook. Hopefully this is working now. Hopefully you guys have sound there. And if not, I will just upload the video that I've done for YouTube later on this evening. Give me 2 seconds. Let's see. And hopefully all right, cool. So now we have sound and picture on Facebook again. Sorry for the delay, guys, on Facebook. A lot of technical issues and errors here early on. Hopefully you guys can hear me now. It sounds like you guys can. Welcome back in. I'm sorry about earlier mistakes. Technology, it is what it is. Even a guy like me, a millennial, as you say, has issues with it. Hopefully I will be on Tip Top 4 tomorrow as we are back in studio with Dog Nation Daily. I am very excited for what comes of that, and I'm looking forward to it. So, yeah, just recap here. Sorry for YouTube audience. I know I said I would stick with you guys. But Barrett Carter goes to Clemson. I think this is a big miss for Georgia in the sense that you can't come out and say that linebacker is a huge position of need like Kirby Smart did in the 2020 National Signing Day, and then have a player and prospect as good as Barrett Carter is in your own sort of backyard in backyard. Metro Atlanta obviously has a lot of competition, and I'll have a story on how Georgia has done in Metro Atlanta in recent seasons. But you can't have a player that close to you, and then he decides to go to a school that Barrett Carter's first career game. I don't expect him to decommit from Clemson. Clemson has 3 decommitments in the past 5 recruiting cycles. I expect him to stick with Clemson, even though Georgia's obviously going to try like heck to try and flip him. Cynthia Corona from Chatsworth, Georgia. Good to see you. His first career game, Barrett Carter's first career game, is very likely going to be against Georgia, and there's a chance that Georgia sees him more often than that if these two teams eventually go on to make the playoff. So where does Georgia sort of go from here? And I know YouTube, I'm sorry, I'm giving you the Cliff Notes. I'm giving Facebook the Cliff Notes version. The biggest name to know at linebacker right now is Shmuel Munden. I personally believe that Munden should be Georgia's top target in this class. You've sort of seen they've made a very aggressive pitch on social media to target Munden. He's been their Georgia staff and Georgia commits have put out multiple graphics of him sort of encouraging him to commit to Georgia, to pick Georgia. Munden teased recently that he could possibly be nearing a June decision, but he doesn't know exactly when in June that might be. As you all know, recruiting is very fluid, so I wouldn't necessarily expect it to be June 1st. It could be June 15th. It could be June 30th. It could be sort of any of that time in June, but that right now is what he has teased. He's from Paulding County High School in Dallas, Georgia. I think he's absolutely one of the top targets. He's obviously, the 5-star prospect plays into it, number 27 overall prospect as of today in the 247 Sports composite rankings, and that's probably going to move up because 247 Sports is doing a rankings bump or a rankings re-rank tomorrow, and I expect him to climb even higher. And Joseph Kennedy, while right now I think Carter might be the better pure football player, long term, Munden has as big a ceiling as any linebacker, I think, in this recruiting class. He's 6'3", probably a little bit faster than Carter is. And I think if Georgia lands him, that certainly eases the sort of blow or sting of missing out on a guy like Barrett Carter, who I think is a very talented player. And Clemson got a very good player and someone who, even though I believe he's the number 56 overall prospect in this 2021 recruiting cycle, I don't think there are 50 better high school football players in the country than Barrett Carter. Clemson absolutely got a very good player. Another name to know, Xavier Sori. He's out of Graceville, Florida. Sort of like Munden, he's a freak athlete, 6'3", 215. His basketball highlights, this sort of Brandon Adams shtick. His basketball highlights and the things he does on a basketball court are just otherworldly. And the fact that guy is going to play linebacker at an SEC level, that should terrify you just by what he can do and how he can hit. So, Steve Highland, good to see you. Kathy Aquava Green, why does UGA struggle in the Atlanta area? Atlanta's it's just there are so many teams that pull from here. There are so many schools that have deep relationships to different schools. For example, Mickey Kahn is the safeties coach at Clemson. Those who follow Georgia high school football know he was a longtime coach at Grayson. I certainly believe that having Mickey Kahn on staff and his relationships in the Atlanta area is a huge reason into why Clemson has had so much success recruiting the Metro Atlanta area in recent years. You think of guys like last year, Miles Murphy, 5-star defensive end. The list goes on, beyond just Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence out of Gainesville and Cartersville, respectively. Clemson, Andrew Booth out of Archer. They've had a lot of success recruiting the Atlanta area, and they're not sort of the only school to do so. The other thing is, for some of these kids in this Metro Atlanta area, Auburn is just as close as Georgia is, certainly in that western part of the state. And Tennessee's only 3 hours away. Clemson's 2 hours away from the heart of Atlanta. It's only a little bit farther at least from my neck of the woods. It was a 2-hour drive from Roswell to Clemson, and it was about an hour and a half from Roswell to Athens. So, what's an extra 30 minutes? It's not, significantly all that much more traffic. So, I don't know about blacklisting Grayson players from Georgia. Georgia did land D'Angelo Gibbs, a 4-star player out of Grayson a few years ago, and unfortunately now he's at Tennessee. But I don't buy into whole that aspect of it. Mickey Kahn was, I believe, college roommates and teammates with Dabo Swinney. That's why he is now on staff there at Clemson, and that's why for a long time you've seen Clemson have a lot of success with those Grayson area players. So, David Williams, good to see you from Americus, Georgia. There was a question here on YouTube earlier. by All About the Waves, Connor, do you think Ohio State has already locked up the number one recruiting class? At this moment, no. Locked up, no. But Ohio State is trending for a couple of five-star prospects from the state of Washington. Emeka Ejibuka, who I believe is the number one wide receiver in the country. And then JT, and I'm going to butcher his name, Tiamalu, he is the number one defensive tackle in the country. Those are both five-star prospects. If you're rooting for Georgia to get the number one class in the country, you need to root very hard for Jimmy Lake, the new head coach at Washington, to keep those guys at home, because I think knowing the math and the numbers behind it, it's going to be very difficult for Georgia to catch and pass Ohio State if they add those two guys to an already stacked recruiting class. Now, having said all that, Georgia is in a position right now, I believe they're probably 17th, 18th, 19th, low teens in terms of where the recruiting class is. But they have as much room to grow and add to their class as anybody. Only 7 commitments right now. I believe based on average recruit rankings, only Ohio State and Clemson have a higher average rated player. And a number of Georgia's top prospects are still out there, still uncommitted. James Williams, 5-star safety. Tony Grimes, who's going to announce a top 3 on May 31st, 5-star cornerback, number one cornerback in the nation. Georgia's very much in on him. Jamel Munden, who we just spoke at length about, is a guy they're after. Deion Colsey is a top 50 wide receiver who lives in Athens. He is Georgia's probably top wide receiver target at the moment. Donovan Edwards, a top 40 overall prospect. He is perhaps Georgia's top running back prospect, and it'll be probably a Georgia-Michigan battle for there. So you have a lot of elite prospects that have not made their decision, at least publicly yet, that Georgia is still in on. Last year, from after that LSU loss in December, on December 7th, I believe, Georgia got 10 commitments for that 2020 signing class. The reality is schools like Ohio State and schools like Clemson, they like to get their work done early a lot of times. Kirby Smart, based on his belief of this, that sort of evaluating the senior tape and the importance that plays in sort of how Georgia goes about recruiting players. That's why you don't necessarily always see a ton of early recruits or early recruiting commitments for the Georgia, staff and whatnot. I still expect Georgia. Jermaine King brings up top 3 class, number 1 in the SEC. I think, between Georgia, Alabama, and LSU, that's going to be the battle for number 1 in the SEC every year. I mentioned Xavier Story earlier. Dallas Turner is another name to know. He's an outside linebacker prospect who's a top 50 overall prospect. Those are big Georgia-Alabama battles during this 2021 recruiting class. Georgia wins both of those. I think you'd have to feel very, very good about the potential of Georgia landing the number 1 class in the SEC, probably a top 2 class. And a year ago in July, Jeff Sintel and I went to Fresno to work with Kendall Milton on his commitment video, and he told us that day Georgia's finishing with a top 2 class, and it's not going to be number 2. And I don't know, the math at that point didn't exactly support that holistically, but that's exactly what ended up happening. And Georgia signed the number 1 class a year ago. As long as Kirby Smart is the head coach at Georgia, they're going to do very well. And for all the complaints about Georgia's struggles in the Atlanta area, and I've written about this and I'm going to write about this again, Smart brings up, last year, you look at Arik Gilbert, 5-star player. James Kump also brings up Mason Smith or Leonard Taylor. Those guys are 5-star defensive tackles that Georgia, I think, very much wants. Taylor out of Miami, Palmetto High School in Florida, and then Mason Smith out of LSU. Smith, admittedly, is probably going to be a very tough pull, just given LSU. The last time LSU didn't get a 5-star prospect from the state of Louisiana was all the way back in the 2014 class. So LSU does a very good job of keeping their absolute best players in the state at home. So I think that if Georgia lands Mason Smith, a defensive tackle, that's going to be probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, recruiting win for Kirby Smart in his time at Georgia. Hugh Nash, good to see you. Welcome in. James Crump says, sorry, our Turner will be at Bantam. Maybe. I wouldn't count out Georgia in how they do and how they are doing and how they recruit. They've pulled off some pretty big wins against Alabama in recent history as well. Elite defensive lineman. Yeah, so Crow King, to answer your question, Mason Smith is that elite defensive lineman, especially in that Jordan Davis mold. I believe he's 6'5", 315 pounds already. That's sort of the size that Georgia likes to see from its – and not just, weight-wise. I think the more important number there for the Jordan Davis comp, that sort of John Atkins manning the middle type. It's less about weight because you can get a lot of guys in between that 330, 315 range. It's more so the height thing and just the sheer size. They don't want a 6'1", 300-pound guy there. They want a true mountain of a man. And I think in this class, Mason Smith is that guy. And Matt Talley, as you bring up, yeah, LSU does a great job of keeping their top prospect from home. And, I think most plugged-in Georgia fans, while, you never want to say Georgia can't do it or Kirby Smart won't be able to do it, but that admittedly is a very, very tough pull. So, we've mentioned some of the linebacker prospects, some of the recruiting talk, and I've mentioned Georgia actually, with the players they landed, you think of the in-state success that they've had. And obviously, in recent years, they've admittedly gone more out-state to land guys. I think you even look last year, to draw parallels to the Barrett Carter thing right now. Arik Gilbert was the best player in the state of Georgia last year. 5-star tight end. We don't need to rehash about how good of a player he was. He was the best player in the state of Georgia, regardless of recruiting rankings. But in terms of pure football player, he carried Marietta to a 7-8 state title. And he ends up going to LSU. Makes a lot of sense given the success LSU's offense was having at the time. And it made a lot of sense for him to go there, just given, what to expect going forward. But Georgia, and that was admittedly a miss in the recruiting prospect. You can't let guys that talented, guys that Georgia had been recruiting for a long time, go elsewhere, and that's what happened. But Georgia recovered in that 2020 recruiting class at that tight end position. They bring in Darnell Washington, who is admittedly not the sort of refined player right now that Gilbert is, but has the measurables and tools to potentially down the line be just as effective as a player. He was a 5-star prospect. He was the number 23 overall prospect in that class. So he's not number 5, but he's still clearly one of the best overall prospects. And I think that's an important use to describe Washington. Still a big recruiting win. They just had to go out to Las Vegas to get him. And, and Smart has acknowledged this. As much as we all would love the idea of Georgia locking down the state of Georgia, that just can't happen for reasons that I touched on in YouTube earlier. The geography of the state of Georgia, LSU and everyone loves to compare them, or they love to bring up Ohio State. LSU and Ohio State are the only Power 5 schools in that state, so they have a much, much easier. And not just in that state, but even like remotely close to those big city sectors there. The Michigan State, those are still a great ways away from Cleveland, Ohio, and sort of that Columbus area, southern Ohio as well. Yes, A&M is, I guess, probably like 3 or 4 hours from New Orleans, but the reality is the closest school, like there just aren't a whole lot of close schools to New Orleans, those big city centers that produce the best kids. With Georgia, Auburn's an hour 45, 2 hours, depending on how fast you're going down 85 to get to Atlanta. It's about 3 hours, three and a half hours to get to Alabama. It's 2 hours to get to Clemson. It's 3 hours to get to Tennessee. It's 3 hours to get to South Carolina. And it's an hour and a half from Atlanta to get to Athens. So I think the geography of the state and the layout and all the other various big-time schools and in their proximity to Georgia, I certainly think that plays a part in why Georgia sort of isn't able to truly lock down the state. But I'll have some deeper numbers. And Georgia's actually, weirdly enough, in sort of the non-metro Atlanta areas of the state, they've done a very good job of getting the best players. You think guys like Trayvon Walker. I'm sure I'm forgetting great players from around there. But, Trayvon Walker comes to mind. Richard LeCount out of Riceboro, sort of in that Savannah area. You think guys sort of from farther outside that Atlanta footprint, they've done very well. But just because the competition is so fierce and so many coaches have such long-standing relationships to that Atlanta area, and Kirby Smart obviously does as well, but it's just so much more competitive in there that it's never going to be realistic to expect them to sort of recruit at that LSU in Louisiana or Ohio State and Ohio sort of levels. So, and Danny Smith, I think hits the nail on the head. I never worry about recruiting, but I expect Kirby and their coaching staff to close out with a top 5 class. Georgia's the only program in the country that has had 4 consecutive top 3 recruiting classes. So Kirby, while missing out on Barrett Carter is certainly a miss right now, they're going to be just fine. So that is what it is. Seth Ald, no, this is not a dorm room. This is my bedroom. We're obviously not going into the Dog Nation studio at this moment, though we will be tomorrow morning with Brandon Adams, Dog Nation Daily. Tune in, 10 o'clock, back in the friendly studio. So make sure to check that out. But yeah, this is just my setup at home. So, Matt Talley, when we weren't recruiting as well back in the day, it used to be a lot bigger deal to miss on guys like Carter. Now Smart just signs the next guy that is usually just as good or better. And I think that's a very fair way to put it. The Mark Richt, that 2013 class, if Brian Schottenheimer and the drop-off from Mike Bobo was the number one reason that Georgia took a downturn, the failings in the 2013 class were the reason that Rick lost his job in 2015. It was the last time Georgia didn't sign a number one recruiting class. And the reason that class finished as high as number 12 was because they signed 32 prospects, but a lot of those guys did not pan out. You have to go down a ways to find sort of guys who were real contributors and helped out a lot. And they just had Robert Condici, Alvin Kamara, Carl Lawson, guys who were very productive SEC players, all picked to go elsewhere. That sort of stemmed the whole, Georgia needs to recruit the state of Georgia better. And Kirby Smart, early on in his career at Georgia, did that. That 2017 class made up largely of guys from the state of Georgia. Last two classes, not necessarily as much so, but the success that they've had on a national level has eased some of those concerns with recruiting in the state. And even in this class right now, 6 of the 7 recruits or commits at the moment are from the state of Georgia. Elijah Judy is the only one. He's from Philadelphia. And, while, yes, Clemson now does have 2 top 10 commits from the state of Georgia, they're the only school that currently can say that, other than Georgia, that has commits that are in the top 10 players of the state. So I do expect Georgia to do a much better job of, and it's just sort of the way the class shakes out, of keeping their best players home in this cycle. But, we've seen you don't always necessarily need to go about doing it that way, and you can have success both recruiting heavily locally and nationally. And, Georgia every year sometimes is going to win those out-of-state battles more often than not, and sometimes they're going to be able to keep their best players local and at home. So James Crump brings up tight end recruiting. I think they're only going to take one, and right now he mentions Kane Barong. Kane Barong is committed to Notre Dame. I would expect they're only going to take one. Malachi Matavo, I'm probably butchering that name as well. He's set to decide, I believe, May 27th. That's the name to watch there. But I think Brock Bowers is the name James Crump brings up. I believe that is the guy that Georgia probably ends up with in this class. Hopefully ends up, if you want to see them recruit well, continue to recruit well at the tight end. He's out of California. He's closer to Brett Seither in the size. He does not fit the Darnell Washington, Rylan Goody, John Fitzpatrick, true, 6'7", 6'6", just giants. He's probably a better athlete than anyone Georgia has at the position right now. But again, obviously doesn't have that same size. William Gleaton asks about running back. They have Lavassier Carroll committed right now, and I think they feel very good about what they have in him. He's a very good player, playing down at IMG Academy, so he's playing with the best and against the best recruits in the country. I think the 2 big names to watch out for, and one of these I think is much bigger, would be Donovan Edwards. He's a 4-star, borderline 5-star prospect out of Michigan. Obviously, recruiting against the Wolverines will be the biggest factor there, though Notre Dame might potentially get involved, Penn State as well. And then another name to keep an eye out for is LJ Johnson out of Texas. He has not visited Georgia, so whenever the NCAA decides to sort of allow visits again, and right now visits are suspended through June 30th. And honestly, I probably expect that to continue at least until probably September 1st, maybe then once again, the whole COVID thing, and we're actually going to touch on that here in just a second. Once that gets done, expect visits to open up back up again, but Johnson has not visited, and I think Edwards would probably be the bigger want for Georgia in this class to pair with a guy like Lavassier Carroll. So I mentioned, I believe in the headline on one of these, Georgia players and college players as a whole may be returning to campuses fairly soon. The NCAA is set to vote tomorrow on whether to lift the mandate of no on-campus athletic activities that is set to expire on May 31st. And then on Friday, SEC presidents are going to vote on a date of when those member schools will be allowed to return and sort of get campus activities under the way. I know Lincoln Riley is someone who has come out publicly and pushed back on the idea that we need to have people back June 1st. Personally, I'd probably be a little surprised, or at least a little interested in sort of the reasoning of having someone back June 1st. I think you can have guys back on campus June 15th and maybe even July 1st and still sort of get all the off-season, off-field conditioning done and sort of needed where it needs to be for practice to start in August. I think another interesting thing to watch with as this NCAA lifts the mandate is, do they give any extra actual practices to teams? Georgia, Alabama, so many of these top college teams did not even get a chance to start their spring practices, much less finish one. So do you see them get, 4 to 6 extra practices in the month of July, whereas usually you only get, I believe, 15 practices from a month out before your first game? So I think from that standpoint, it will be interesting to watch and see when and if what the NCAA decides to do. Do they grant extra practices, or do they stick to the 30 days before your first game is when practice starts? I think that'll be very interesting. So I do think that is something to watch there. If we lift that mandate, doesn't mean summer classes will start also. I believe online classes or summer school classes at Georgia are online through June 30th. So my guess, and this is just an educated one or an uneducated one, would be that probably you imagine you start seeing more summer classes enroll. But the NCAA has already said that, some of the requirements, especially for guys coming into the program, that, you don't need certain grades or test scores that you would usually do. You just need a certain lower requirement than you would need in most years, because so much of it has been thrown up in the air. My mom is a teacher, and this is her last week, and she told me, and this is to be expected, but, she's teaching middle schoolers, and those kids checked out a while ago. And I know in Athens, Clark County, it happened earlier. So, the whole school requirement and players coming in, I'd love to talk to Kirby Smart and ask, when are those incoming recruits, those incoming freshmen? Georgia had 6 guys enroll early, but that means there's still, I believe, 18 other members of that 2020 signing class, along with a guy like Trey McKitty, who graduated from Florida State this weekend. When do they sort of start being allowed to get the instruction? The NCAA did say that once you have graduated and have earned those credits or sort of done the prerequisite work that you need to do, once you have that, you are able to start working with the team, getting instruction from strength coaches, which I think is the really big thing there. Start working with a guy like Scott Sinclair, who I'm still busting out his workouts and still kicking my butt, but very grateful that we had those. But so once those players graduate, or at least have finished there, that's sort of where you go from there. As far as fans in the stands, that's, it's tough, because right now you don't want to have the whole pie, but if you can get, if we can get the season started on time and play all 12 games and all teams across the country get to play. And I think, California and New York, what they came out and said yesterday, we're starting in June, we're going to allow pro sports again. I think that was a really big step for sports restarting across the country. It shows that these governments, for the most part, while some are being more cautious than others, they understand that there's a possibility they could get left behind by some of these other states that don't necessarily have the same outbreaks that New York obviously had, and can sort of, they're all going to try and be in lockstep and be on the same path. And I think that'll be a really important thing to watch for. So going from there, and Jermaine King brings up, the entire summer school semester is online, which makes sense. And I actually think going forward, South Carolina announced yesterday that after Thanksgiving, classes are going to move online. And I believe Oklahoma as well announced that classes over 40 people, so usually your large lecture classes, those large lecture classes, those will be moved online as well. So, to sort of reduce the risk of overcrowding and all that there. So, we'll see with that. My sister's at UGA right now. She does expect to go back, but that's just sort of the, expecting all this to work out and not really having a educated decision. So we'll see about that. I think with each passing day, as the numbers, don't continue to spike and sort of we continue to test and do the necessary things, I think we're getting closer to a sort of return to sports. I don't know about normalcy, but seeing sports again, I think this weekend, This won't surprise you. I watched some of the Bundesliga, German soccer. They're sort of the first big professional league over in Europe to get things up and rolling again. They were playing without fans. It was a little bit of an adjustment, especially because knowing that league and sort of European soccer as a whole, the fan level is maybe the one thing in the world that rivals the passion you see in college football. And for it to sort of be silent and empty, there was certainly an adjustment there. But honestly, I was just grateful that we have some form of sports to watch again. You saw, they had the exhibition golf match with Rory and Dustin Johnson and Ricky Fowler. You had NASCAR on Sunday as well. So we are baby steps, and I think the decisions by the NCAA and the SEC and the various conferences this week will be along those same lines of baby steps of things returning to normal. I think in probably the next 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to get firm decisions on when and if the NBA and Major League Baseball come back and have their seasons. Obviously, the NBA is closer to ending theirs, whereas MLB is just trying to get theirs started. So we'll see. And James Crump, I agree with you. Obviously, the fan atmosphere certainly makes sports what it is. But I as long as we just get games, I will certainly be satisfied. And if hopefully, we continue to make progress on this thing. We continue to test, and maybe not to start the season, but 3-4 weeks into the season, we are able to get fans. I know BA and I were talking on a show this morning. Georgia plays Alabama September 19th, and just because the way Alabama fans talk, if Georgia were to beat them that day, Alabama fans would just, till the cows come home, say, oh, you didn't beat Alabama when there were fans in the stands, so it shouldn't count, or whatever excuse they'll come up with. So I hope for a return to normalcy. I hope fans come back. But, right now I'll just take athletes being back on campus and they're progressing towards starting the 2020 season on time, which for Georgia, September 7th in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I do think it will be interesting to see how sort of the Falcons go about with Mercedes-Benz, because I believe their season starts that next weekend, and do they want to, and obviously they've doled that out for Chick-fil-A and there's a lot of money involved with that, but do these professional teams that they actually own the stadiums, they're not governmentally owned or controlled, do they want to open these up to other people and just have a sort of greater risk factor of someone contracting it just because they're letting in other people in a sort of thing that they can't really control? So, we spent a lot of time talking about recruiting tonight. Yeah, Jermaine King, let Bama fans complain. As long as Georgia gets the W, that's all that really matters. And that'd be pretty sweet if Georgia does win that game that day. Any final questions, thoughts, concerns? I know Facebook is being Facebook. So questions, concerns. We're going to do this on Tuesday night now. We're going to give Griff the Monday night slot. So he'll be in there around 7 p.m. Yeah, James Crump brings up, hey, I'll take a semi-pack national championship victory. As long as it's played on the field, regardless of whether or not there are fans in there, all counts the same in my book. So, and David Lammers, you bring up, there probably is an interesting way to try and figure out to get some fans in there. But I do think that a lot of that comes down to just money and who's willing to sort of pay what will be even greater price for tickets. And, I don't necessarily know if opening it up to a sort of public market is sort of the best way to get fans in the stadium, because the reality is a lot more of the passionate fans are not the ones that are raking home millions and hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's the regular Joe blue collar who saves up a non-insignificant amount of his paycheck to sort of go to Georgia football games, and to deprive those fans of it and just allow sort of the rich to get in there, I think would be interesting. Cole King asks, who do we think of guys to watch on the defensive line? Talking this season, or are you talking recruiting? This season, I think Trayvon Walker is someone who is poised for a breakout. I know we talked about that on Cover 4 last week, and I think he's someone who could certainly, and Georgia probably needs to have a big season. As far as recruiting, we talked a little bit about Mason Smith. He's sort of the pie in the sky option, but the reality is pulling him out of Louisiana is going to be really difficult. I think Leonard Taylor is another big name to watch there out of Miami. That'll be a Georgia-Florida battle. Corey Foreman, he's mentioned about wanting to visit Georgia. I'd be pretty surprised if Georgia lands him, but if they land him, then there's a good chance they can land Mason Smith as well. I think Foreman probably ends up going to Southern California. I believe Tyrion Dawkins-Ingram is a player to watch there. He's out of South Carolina. I believe he announced the top 3 of Georgia, South Carolina, and Tennessee. He was set to make his announcement, I believe, this coming weekend, but that has been pushed back a little bit into June. I think that's a name to watch there for Georgia. If Georgia can land his commitment, that would go a big way of pairing him with guys like Jonathan Jefferson and Marlon Dean, who they already have committed. All right, we've gone 30 minutes on Facebook. We're about to go 40 on YouTube. Facebook, sorry again for the technical issues. It is what it is. My laptop was just being weird. So have a great Tuesday night, guys. It was great seeing you, great chatting with you. We will be back again next Tuesday. At least you're going to hear from me on these Tuesday nights going forward, and looking forward to talking. We had some news tonight. Barrett Carter picks Clemson, so where does Georgia sort of go from there? It'll be interesting to see. I think Shamel Munnard is a big name to know. We talk a little, there's going to be a lot of news both tomorrow and on Friday in terms of where Georgia goes, or how soon college athletes are allowed to get back on campus. And I think that's going to be a really big step for the season starting on time. So we're looking forward to that. Jermaine King, see you on the other side. I like to believe that's a Town reference. Watch that this weekend. Watch the extended version, which not better than the original. They tweaked the ending, and I wasn't a fan there. So as always, great talking with you guys. Make sure to tune in Dog Nation throughout the week. Dog Nation Daily back in the studio tomorrow. Can't wait. Very excited for that. Got Jeff Santel before the hedges. He'll provide probably further context on Carter and deeper conversations of where the Bulldogs go next. So that's, we spent a lot of time tonight talking about recruiting. He will answer even more of your questions on that, not just limited to the linebacker position. Cover 4 live. It might be Thursday. It might be Friday. It might be a little bit later on Thursday, but I believe the plan right now is to continue doing it. And certainly, in the weeks ahead, obviously, I just don't know specifically about this Thursday. But again, great seeing you guys. Great hearing from you guys. Check us out, Dog Nation. We'll have great content up and hopefully some good news on players getting back and taking one step closer to starting the 2020 college football season on time.